The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Ambassador Jake Morrison walked through them with steady steps, his black uniform crisp and clean. Behind him followed two other humans, but today they were just observers. Today was about judgment. The chamber was huge, built to hold representatives from 12 different alien species. High above, curved walls reached toward a domed ceiling that showed the stars outside Station Nexus Prime, 12 platforms arranged. In a circle held the council members, each one designed for the needs of different alien bodies. Jake took his place at the center platform, the one reserved for those being judged. He had stood here many times before, but never like this. Usually he came to discuss trade deals or settle minor disputes between human colonies and alien worlds. Today felt different. The air seemed thicker, heavy with something that made his skin crawl. Veltar the Ancient rose from the highest platform. The Zephyrian leader was old beyond human understanding, his blue skin marked with the silver lines that showed great age among his people. His forearms moved in formal gestures as he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Ambassador Morrison, Veltar began, his words translated by the chamber's systems into perfect English. You stand before this council to answer for the actions of your species. The human race has once again shown its true nature. Jake said nothing. He had learned long ago that the council preferred their ceremonies. Let them speak first. Let them reveal their hand before he played his cards. The Altarian representative, a tall being covered in what looked like living crystal, stood next. 3 months ago, your Captain Lisha Rodriguez attacked a Cytherian fleet. This attack was unprovoked and excessive. Now Jake spoke. The Cytherian fleet was raiding the mining colony on Kepler 442b. They had already killed over 300 miners and were preparing to take slaves. The Cytherians were conducting legitimate salvage operations, said the Centaurian delegate, his tentacles waving in patterns that Jake recognized as dismissive. Your people turned a simple resource dispute into a bloodbath. Jake felt his jaw tighten. Legitimate salvage operations. Is that what you call murdering families and stealing children? Veltar raised one of his forehands for silence. Captain. Rodriguez did not simply defend the colony. She pursued the Cytherian ships across 3 star systems. She destroyed their entire fleet and their base stations, 17 ships. Over 4,000 beings dead. 4,000 raiders who had been terrorizing the Outer Rim for 2 years, Jake replied. 4,000 killers who would have continued their attacks if we had not stopped them. The vegan ambassador, a being that looked like a walking tree, with too many eyes, swayed slightly as it spoke. This is exactly the problem with humans. You see every conflict as a war to the death. You cannot simply defend. You must destroy completely. Other voices joined in. The spider-like Arcturian spoke of human unpredictability. The floating gas bag Rigelian complained about human refusal to follow proper surrender protocols. One by one, they listed their complaints. About humanity's military doctrine, Jake listened to each accusation. He had heard them all before, but never gathered together like this, never presented as crimes. Humans fight like animals, said the Procyon representative, its mechanical voice flat and cold. When cornered, you become savage. When attacked, you respond with 10 times the force needed. You do not know when to stop. We stop when the threat is gone, Jake said quietly. We stop when our people are safe. Veltar gestured again, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed Captain Rodriguez's ship, the Defiance, pursuing the fleeing Cytherian vessels. The display ran for several minutes, showing the systematic destruction of the raider fleet. Look at this footage, Veltar said. The Cytherians were fleeing. They posed no immediate threat. Yet your captain hunted them down like prey animals. Jake watched the display without emotion. He had seen the full report, including the parts the council was not showing. The parts where Cytherian ships had been loaded with human prisoners. The parts where they found slave pens and torture chambers in the destroyed base stations. The council has made its decision, Veltar announced. Humanity is expelled from the Galactic Council effective immediately. All human military vessels will withdraw from Council space within 6 months. All colonies and outposts will be removed. All trade agreements are terminated. The vote was quick. 12 hands, claws, tentacles, or mechanical appendages rose in approval, not one dissent. Not even from the species humanity had helped in the past. Jake stood in the sudden silence, looking around the chamber at beings he had worked with for years. Some would not meet his eyes. Others stared at him with what he could only interpret as satisfaction. "Very well," Jake said finally. "Humanity accepts the Council's decision." Several of the representatives seemed surprised by his calm tone. They had probably expected anger or pleading. "All human personnel will withdraw from Council space as requested," Jake continued. "All trade agreements are hereby terminated. All defense pacts are cancelled. All technology sharing arrangements end today." He paused, looking directly at Veltar. "All auxiliary services provided by humanity will also cease immediately." The Zephyrian leader waved dismissively. "Of course. We expect complete withdrawal." Jake smiled slightly. "I want to make sure the Council understands. When I say all auxiliary services, I mean all services, including those that many of you may not have realized we were providing." Something in his tone made a few of the representatives shift uncomfortably. But Veltar remained confident. "Humanity's departure will be a relief to all civilized species. We will manage quite well without your violent influence." Jake nodded politely. "I am sure you will. Thank you for your time, Council members. This will be humanity's final appearance before this body." He turned and walked toward the doors, his two companions falling into step behind him. Just before reaching the exit, he turned back one last time. "One final note," Jake said. "In 6 months, when all human personnel have withdrawn, you may notice some changes in your local security situations. Small things at first, nothing to worry about, I am sure." The doors closed behind him with the same soft hiss. An hour later, Jake stood in the communication center of the Human Embassy Station, speaking directly to Earth Command. Admiral Roy Patterson's weathered face filled the screen, his gray eyes hard as steel. "They actually did it," Jake reported. "Unanimous vote for expulsion. 6 months to complete withdrawal." Patterson nodded slowly. "I hoped they would reconsider." "I really did. They made their choice, Admiral. Now we make ours." Patterson was quiet for a long moment, looking at something off-screen. Jake knew he was probably looking at the classified charts that showed humanity's real positions throughout the galaxy. The hidden monitoring stations, the secret defense platforms, the dimensional rift containment systems. "Begin Operation Silent." "Departure," Patterson said finally. "All personnel are to withdraw immediately. All classified installations are to be abandoned in place. All monitoring systems are to be shut down. And the containment protocols, sir," Patterson's expression grew even harder, "discontinued. If the Council wants to manage galactic security without human involvement, then they can manage all of it." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's air conditioning. "Understood, Admiral. What about the refugee populations in our care?" "Any non-humans who want to come with us are welcome. Any who prefer to stay in Council space can do." "So, their choice." The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone in the communication center. Through the viewport, he could see the lights of the Council station growing smaller as the human embassy moved away. Soon, those lights would be the only human presence left in this part of space. In 6 months, the galaxy would learn what it meant to truly be alone. Captain Danny Walsh stood on the command deck of Outpost Guardian, watching the last human transport ship disappear into hyperspace. The massive station had been home to 3,000 people just 6 months ago. Now only essential personnel remained, and even they would be gone by tomorrow. Guardian Station floated in the empty space between 2 star systems, far from any inhabited worlds. Most beings never knew it existed. That had always been the point. The station's sensors reached deep into dimensions that normal science could not detect, watching for tears in reality itself. Sir, the Dimensional Monitoring Array is showing increased activity, reported Lieutenant Corinne Foster from her station. Her young face looked worried as she studied the readings. We're detecting 17 new rifts in the past hour. Danny nodded grimly. Expected. The automated systems have been failing all week. How long until total sensor blackout? At current rates, maybe 3 days after we leave. 3 days. Danny had hoped for longer, but the automated systems needed constant maintenance. Without human technicians to repair and calibrate them, the sensors would go dark quickly. What about the containment fields around the major rifts? Karen checked her console again. Most are stable for now, but the fields around Rift Complex 7 are fluctuating. That one's been trouble for years. Danny remembered Rift Complex 7. A cluster of dimensional tiers near the vegan trade routes, each one sealed with containment technology that the Galactic Council races could not understand. If those fields failed, things from dead universes would pour into normal space. Things that fed on life itself. Log it in the final report, Danny said. Mark it as high priority for whoever comes after us. Both of them knew no one would come after them. The Council races did not believe in dimensional threats. Most of them could not even detect the rifts that human sensors watched constantly. Communication alert chimed on the command console. Danny accepted the incoming message and saw the face of Helen Barnes, governor of Harmony 7. She looked older than when he had last seen her, stress lines marking her features. Danny, thank God you're still there, Helen said without preamble. I need to ask you about something. The Altarian colonies are reporting crop failures across 3 continents. They're asking if we know anything about soil treatments. Danny felt a familiar weight in his stomach. Harmony 7 was an agricultural world shared between humans and Altarians. The Altarians had specifically requested human withdrawal from the planet, claiming they could manage their crops without human interference. Helen, you know I can't discuss classified biological programs. The Altarians are facing complete harvest failure. They're talking about starvation. Can't you tell them anything? Danny was quiet for a moment. The soil bacteria program had been running for decades, introduced gradually to prevent the plague blight that naturally occurred on worlds with Altarian-type soil chemistry. The Altarians had never known about it because they had never asked. Tell them to check their soil for bacterial diversity, Danny said finally. They might want to introduce some beneficial microorganisms. Helen's eyes showed understanding. She had been a colonial administrator long enough to read between the lines. They won't know which ones to use. No, they won't. The communication ended, leaving Danny alone with his thoughts. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. Human agricultural specialists were being asked about failing crops. Human engineers were getting emergency calls about broken terraforming equipment. Human doctors were being consulted about rising disease rates. All of them were giving the same response they had been ordered to give. Polite regrets and referrals to non-human experts. Lieutenant Foster looked up from her console again. Sir, we're getting a priority message from Admiral Patterson. The Admiral's face appeared on the main screen, his expression as stern as ever. Behind him, Danny could see the command center on Earth, busy with people managing the largest military withdrawal in galactic history. Captain Walsh, what's your status? All civilian personnel evacuated. Military staff reduced to essential. Crew only will complete withdrawal in 18 hours. Good. Any problems with the local governments? Danny thought about Helen's call and the dozen others like it he had received in the past week. Nothing we can't handle, sir. Some requests for technical assistance, but we're referring them to council experts. Patterson nodded. That's the policy. How are the dimensional monitoring systems? Failing as expected. Most sensors will go offline within days of our departure. Containment fields around major rifts should last a few months before requiring maintenance. And if they don't get maintained? Danny hesitated. He had run the projections many times, hoping he was wrong. Best case scenario, we see increased dimensional entity incursions within 6 months. Worst case, total containment failure and massive Breaches into normal space. Timeline for Council races to notice the problem. That depends on how fast the entities spread and how much damage they cause. Could be weeks, could be years. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Captain, I want you to understand something. This decision wasn't made lightly, but humanity cannot continue to protect people who despise us for protecting them. Danny understood. He had read the classified reports about human casualties over the years. Hundreds of people killed fighting dimensional entities that the Council races never knew existed. Thousands more injured or mentally damaged by exposure to interdimensional horrors. All of it classified. All of it unknown to the very people they died protecting. I understand, sir. Complete your withdrawal and report to Sector Command for reassignment. Earth Command out. The screen went dark, leaving Danny alone with his crew. Around him, the command center hummed with the quiet efficiency of people completing their final tasks. Equipment was being shut down, data files were being encrypted and transmitted to Earth, and security systems were being disabled. In 12 hours, Outpost Guardian would be empty and dark. Danny walked to the observation deck, looking out at the stars that had been his view for 7 years. Somewhere among those distant lights, dimensional rifts were opening and closing like wounds in space itself. Soon there would be no one watching them. Lieutenant Foster joined him at the viewport. Sir, do you think they'll figure it out in time? Figure out what, Lieutenant? That they need us. Danny considered the question. The galaxy was vast and dangerous in ways that most species never imagined. Humanity had been fighting threats from parallel dimensions for centuries, learning, through trial and terrible error, how to detect and contain them. They might, Danny said finally. If they survive long enough. Karen looked confused. Survive what? Danny pointed at a seemingly empty section of space visible through the viewport. To normal eyes it looked like any other patch of darkness. Between stars. To sensors tuned to dimensional frequencies, it crawled with potential threats. Everything we've been holding back. The next morning, the last human ship departed Outpost Guardian. The massive station went dark system by system, as automated protocols shut down everything non-essential. The dimensional sensors continued their vigilant watch, but now they watched alone. In the depths of space, ancient things stirred in their prisons between dimensions. The barriers that had held them were weakening, and the Guardians who had maintained those barriers were leaving. Soon, very soon, the galaxy would remember why some species developed fears of the dark. Captain Susan Blake stared at the twisted remains of Mining Station 12 floating in the darkness ahead of her ship. The Altarian Defense Force vessel approached slowly, its sensors trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Captain, I'm not reading any weapon signatures, reported her tactical officer. Whatever did this, it wasn't conventional explosives or energy weapons. Susan nodded, studying the wreckage on her main screen. The mining station had been built to withstand asteroid impacts and solar flares. Its hull was made of crystallized titanium, one of the strongest materials known to Altarian science. Now it looked like something had eaten it from the inside out. Any survivors? Negative, Captain. I'm detecting some kind of energy residue, but no life signs. The distress call had come in 18 hours ago. Mining Station 12 had reported strange readings in the asteroid field, then contact had been lost. Susan's ship had been the closest Defense Force vessel, but even at maximum speed, it had taken them nearly a day to arrive. Take us closer, Susan ordered. I want full sensor sweeps of the wreckage. As they moved nearer, the details became more disturbing. The station's hull showed signs of corrosion that followed no pattern Susan recognized. Metal had been dissolved in curved lines that seemed almost organic, like bite marks from some impossible creature. Captain, I'm picking up faint energy readings from inside the station. Whatever caused this damage might still be there. Susan felt her skin crawl. Life signs. No, not life. Something else. The computer can't classify it. Before Susan could respond, her communications officer spoke up. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the merchant vessel Lucky Strike. They report being under attack by unknown hostiles. Where? Sector 77 Alpha, approximately 6 hours from our current position. Susan made her decision quickly. Mining Station 12 was already lost, but maybe they could save the Lucky Strike. Set course for Sector 77 Alpha. Maximum speed. The Lucky Strike's final transmission reached them 3 hours into their journey. Captain Alex Turner's voice crackled with static and terror as he described his attackers. "They're not solid," Turner reported. "They move through the hull like it's not there. My crew is disappearing one by one. The things look like living shadows, but they're cold, so cold that metal fractures when they touch it." The transmission cut to static, then silence. Susan's ship found the Lucky Strike drifting dead in space, its hull covered in the same strange corrosion patterns they had seen at the mining station. The cargo vessel's lights were still on, but no one answered their calls. "Scan for survivors," Susan ordered, though she already knew what they would find. "No life signs, Captain. The ship appears to be intact except for the hull damage, but there's nobody aboard." That was when Susan began to understand they were dealing with something beyond normal experience. 2 ships attacked by unknown creatures that could pass through solid matter, 2 crews vanishing without trace, 2 vessels left drifting with hulls marked by impossible corrosion. The reports began flooding in over the next few days. Trade convoys? Found empty and drifting in sectors that had been safe for generations. Mining operations abandoned with no sign of their workers. Even military patrols vanishing without sending distress calls. Susan brought her concerns to Admiral Kexthar, commander of the Altarian Defense Force. The elderly Altarian listened to her report with growing unease, his crystal-like features reflecting the light from his office windows. "Captain Blake, what you're describing sounds impossible," the Admiral said. "Creatures that can pass through solid matter. Energy beings that consume metal. These things don't exist in nature. With respect, sir, the evidence suggests otherwise." "Admiral." Kexthar was quiet for a long moment, studying the data files Susan had brought him. Pictures of corroded hulls, energy readings that made no sense, and testimony from the few survivors who had glimpsed their attackers. "Have you considered that? These might be some kind of weapon. Perhaps the Catherians have developed new technology." Susan had considered that possibility, but it didn't fit the evidence. "The attack patterns are wrong for weapons, sir. They're more like predator behavior. These things seem to be hunting for something specific. What could they be hunting?" "I don't know, but I think we should contact the Galactic Council for assistance." The Admiral's expression hardened. "The Council is dealing with their own problems. Half the member species are reporting similar incidents. They've requested that each government handle local security matters independently." That was the first Susan had heard about other species facing the same threats. "Sir, if this is happening galaxy-wide, shouldn't we be coordinating our response? The Council's position is that these are isolated incidents that will resolve themselves with proper local action." Susan felt frustrated but knew better than to argue with her superior. She returned to her ship with orders to continue patrol duties and investigate any further incidents in Altarian space. Over the following weeks, the situation grew worse. Entire colonies stopped responding to communications. Trade routes that had been stable for centuries became too dangerous for civilian traffic. The Defense Force found itself stretched thin trying to respond to emergencies across multiple systems. Dr. Maria Santos contacted Susan during this time. The xenobiologist had worked with human research teams before humanity's expulsion from the Council. Her message was marked as unofficial and highly classified. "Captain Blake, I need to share something with you," Maria said in her recorded message. "Before humanity left Council space, I was part of a joint research project studying dimensional anomalies. The phenomena you're investigating match patterns we observed in parallel dimensions." Susan played the message in private, making sure no one else on her ship could overhear. "The creatures you're encountering are called dimensional parasites," Maria continued. "They exist in the spaces between universes, feeding on energy from normal matter. Usually they can't cross into our dimension because of natural barriers. But those barriers can be damaged by certain kinds of technology or cosmic events. The message went on to describe detection methods and potential countermeasures. But most of the technology Maria mentioned was beyond Altarian capabilities. The equipment needed to even see these creatures properly required sensors that only humans had developed. Captain, I tried to warn the Centaurian Science Council about these threats, but they dismissed my reports as human propaganda. They believe humanity is spreading false information to make the Council regret their decision. Susan felt a chill as she realized the implications. If Dr. Centus was right, then humanity had been fighting these creatures for years. Their expulsion from the Council had left every species defenseless against threats they didn't even know existed. The final part of Maria's message was the most disturbing. Captain, based on the incident reports I've been monitoring, I estimate the dimensional barriers in your sector will fail completely within 6 months. When that happens, the current small-scale incursions will become a full invasion. Susan sat alone in her quarters after the message ended, staring out at the stars and wondering how many of them were already under attack by creatures from dead universes. Somewhere in the darkness, things that should not exist were hunting the living, and no one in authority seemed willing to acknowledge the threat. The galaxy was becoming a more dangerous place, and the people who might have helped were gone by their own choice. Ambassador Rachel Smith stood at the window of Haven's rest station, watching the approaching ships with mixed emotions. 3 years had passed since humanity's withdrawal from Council space, and in all that time, no Council representative had requested a meeting. Now they came not as proud leaders but as desperate survivors. The station existed in neutral space, technically outside both human and Council territory. It served as a trading post and diplomatic meeting point for species that preferred to avoid the formal bureaucracy of official channels. Today, it would host the most important meeting in galactic history. Rachel turned from the window as her aide, Lieutenant Bobby Chun, entered the conference room. The Council delegation has docked, he reported. Veltar the Ancient is requesting immediate audience. How many ships did they bring? 7, but they're all damaged. Heavy battle scarring. Emergency repairs, refugee markings. Their escort vessels look like they've been through hell. Rachel nodded. The reports from Council space had been growing worse each month. Entire sectors abandoned, species driven to near extinction, military forces scattered and broken. The proud Galactic Council had become a collection of refugee fleets, fleeing something they couldn't understand or fight. Send them in. The doors opened to admit the most pitiful sight Rachel had ever witnessed. Veltar the Ancient entered first, but the proud Zephyrian leader she remembered was gone. His blue skin looked gray and worn, his forearms trembling with exhaustion. Behind him came representatives from the surviving Council races, each one showing signs of trauma and desperation. The spider-like Arcturian moved with jerky, nervous motions instead of its usual grace. The crystalline Altarian surface was cracked and dull. Even the mechanical Procyon representative showed damage, its voice unit crackling with static. Ambassador Smith, Veltar began, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Rachel gestured to the chairs arranged around the conference table. Please sit. You all look like you've traveled far. The Council representatives took their seats with obvious relief. Several of them appeared to be fighting. Just to stay conscious. We come to request humanity's return to the galaxy, Veltar said without preamble. The Council formally offers to restore your membership with full privileges and authority over galactic security matters. Rachel kept her expression neutral. That's quite a change in position. 3 years ago you expelled us for being too aggressive. The vegan representative, barely recognizable as the tree-like being Rachel remembered, swayed as it spoke. We were wrong, we understand that now. What changed your mind? Veltar struggled to find words. The galaxy is dying, Ambassador. Species that existed for millions of years have been wiped out in months. Worlds that were centers of civilization are now empty husks. We face threats that we cannot comprehend, let alone fight. Rachel leaned forward slightly. Tell me about these threats. The Council representatives exchanged glances, as if uncertain where to begin. Finally, the Centaurian delegate spoke, its tentacles writhing with remembered fear. They come from nowhere and vanish into nothing, ships that pass through solid matter, creatures of living shadow that drain the life from entire worlds, beings that exist in dimensions we cannot perceive. We've lost 17 colony worlds in the past month alone, added the Altarian. The Catherian hegemony no longer exists. The Rigelian Confederacy has been reduced to 3 refugee ships. Rachel listened to their desperate accounts with professional detachment. She had read the classified reports from human intelligence services. She knew exactly what the Council was facing and why they were facing it. These sound like dimensional entities, Rachel said calmly. Creatures from parallel universes that have found ways to cross into normal space. Veltar's eyes widened. You know about them. Humanity has been fighting them for centuries. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Several of the Council representatives looked confused, as if they couldn't process what Rachel had just told them. That's impossible, the Procyon representative said in its static-filled voice. We have no records of humanity engaging such enemies, Rachel smiled coldly, because it was classified. The Council never asked about our military operations in empty space. You never wondered why certain sectors remained peaceful despite having no obvious defenses. Understanding began to dawn on Veltar's ancient features. The auxiliary services you mentioned during our last meeting. Dimensional monitoring, entity containment, rift stabilization, and threat elimination. Humanity maintained over 300 hidden installations throughout Council space, watching for incursions and dealing with them before anyone else knew they existed. The Council representatives sat in stunned silence as the full scope of their mistake became clear. You knew about this, Veltar whispered. You knew what would happen when you left. We tried to warn you indirectly many times. Every time humans spoke about threats in empty space, every time we requested permission to patrol uninhabited systems, every time we asked for expanded sensor networks, you dismissed all of it as human paranoia. The vegan representative made a sound like wind through dying leaves. How many beings died protecting us from threats we never knew existed? Rachel consulted her datapad. Over the past century, humanity lost approximately 15,000 military personnel in dimensional security operations. All classified, all unknown to the species they died protecting. The weight of that revelation crushed the remaining fight out of the Council delegation. They had expelled the very people who were dying to keep them safe. We offer you anything, Veltar said desperately. Complete authority over galactic security, territorial concessions, access to all our technology. Name your price for returning. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, considering her response. She thought about the human colonies that were thriving in isolation, the peaceful systems where children grew up without fear of dimensional horrors, the military personnel who no longer died fighting invisible wars for ungrateful aliens. I appreciate the offer, Rachel said finally, but humanity is no longer interested in galactic affairs. You would condemn entire species to extinction for the sake of pride. Not pride, Rachel corrected, survival. Humanity learned something important during our time in Council space. We learned that no good deed goes unpunished. We protected you for centuries and received only suspicion and hostility in return. Veltar leaned forward desperately. We can change. We can be better. Rachel stood up, signaling that the meeting was ending. Perhaps you can, but that will have to be your own journey to take. Please, the Centaurian delegate pleaded. At least tell us how to fight them. Give us the knowledge to defend ourselves. Rachel paused at the door. The technology required is beyond your current capabilities. The dimensional sensors alone would take you decades to develop, assuming you even believe they're necessary. How long? Veltar asked quietly. How long do we have? Rachel consulted her datapad one final time. Based on current dimensional degradation rates and the complete failure of containment protocols, I estimate total civilizational collapse within 18 months. Complete dimensional barrier failure within 5 years. The Council representatives sat in horrified silence. as Rachel left the room. Behind her she could hear Veltar weeping, a sound she had never imagined the proud ancient being could make. Outside the conference room, Lieutenant Chen was waiting with concerned expression. "How did it go, Ambassador?" Rachel looked back at the closed doors, beyond which the last remnants of galactic civilization contemplated their doom. "About as well as expected." "Prepare a report for Earth Command?" The Council had their chance to learn humility. Now they'll learn survival. President Nicole Campbell stood in the command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching the final light of the old galaxy fade on the main display. 5 years had passed since humanity's withdrawal, and the dimensional collapse was nearly complete. Ancient barriers between universes had failed one by one, allowing horrors from dead realities to pour into normal space. "Madam President, the last automated defense platform in Sector 12 has gone offline," reported Admiral Roy Patterson. His weathered face showed the strain of watching an entire galaxy die. "That leaves only our inner perimeter stations still operational." Nicole nodded, studying the tactical display that showed humanity's defensive positions. A ring of heavily fortified systems surrounded human space, their weapons and sensors turned outward to watch for threats from the collapsing regions beyond. Inside that ring, human civilization continued to thrive, while outside it, the galaxy burned. Casualty. Reports from the refugee processing stations. "Still manageable," Patterson replied. "We're handling about 50,000 new arrivals per day. Most are from the inner systems that held out longer than expected." Through the reinforced windows of the command center, Nicole could see the lights of New Geneva, one of Earth's newest cities built to house refugees from the galactic collapse. Representatives from dozens of species worked alongside humans, their children playing together in parks while their parents tried to rebuild their lives. The irony was not lost on her. The species that had expelled humanity for being too violent now depended entirely on human protection for their survival. Dr. Peter Kim entered the command center carrying a thick folder of reports. The head of the Dimensional Research Institute looked exhausted, his gray hair even more disheveled than usual. He had been working without rest for months, trying to find some way to slow the galactic collapse. "Madam President, I have the final analysis of the dimensional barrier failures." Nicole accepted the folder, though she already knew what it contained. The barriers between universes were like walls holding back an ocean of chaos. When humanity had maintained the galactic sensor network, they could detect and repair small cracks before they became catastrophic failures. Without that maintenance, the cracks had grown into breaks, the breaks into tears, and the tears into gaping wounds that could never be healed. How long until complete collapse? 6 months, maybe less. The cascade failures are accelerating. When the barriers around the galactic core give way, the resulting dimensional shockwave will destroy what's left of normal spacetime in this galaxy. Nicole was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the billions of beings who had already died and the millions more who would die in the months ahead. The Galactic Council had made their choice when they expelled humanity, but the innocent beings who suffered for that choice deserved better. "What about Project New Genesis?" Dr. Kim's expression brightened slightly. "The preliminary tests are promising. We can create stable pocket dimensions large enough to hold entire star systems. The technology is based on our dimensional containment. Research scaled up to preserve rather than destroy. Resource requirements? Massive. We would need to dedicate our entire industrial capacity for at least 2 years. It would also require us to give up our plans for expansion into other galaxies." Nicole understood the implications. Humanity had been preparing to leave this galaxy even before the Council's expulsion, developing the technology needed to travel to distant galaxies where they could start fresh. Project New Genesis would trap them here, committed to preserving the remnants of galactic civilization instead of seeking new frontiers. "Admiral," Patterson spoke up from his station. "Madam President, we're receiving a priority transmission from the refugee fleet commander. Admiral Sarah Wilson is requesting immediate audience." The main screen shifted to show Admiral Wilson's face. The former Altarian Defense Force officer had become the unofficial leader of the refugee fleets. organizing the survivors of dozens of species into a coherent evacuation effort. Her crystalline features showed the stress of trying to save as many lives as possible while watching entire civilizations die. President Campbell, I need to discuss the situation in the outer territories. We're getting reports of survivor groups trapped in systems we can't reach. Nicole leaned forward. How many? Conservative estimates suggest at least 10 million, being scattered across isolated colonies and hidden bases. They're too far from human space for evacuation, and our refugee ships don't have the firepower to fight their way through the dimensional entities. What are you asking for, Admiral? Sarah Wilson was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with what she was about to say. I'm asking for a human military intervention. A rescue operation to bring out the survivors. The command center fell silent. Everyone present understood what Wilson was asking. It would mean sending human ships and crews into the most dangerous regions of space, where dimensional entities hunted anything that lived. It would mean risking human lives for people whose governments had expelled humanity from the galaxy. Admiral Wilson, I appreciate your concern for the survivors, but humanity's first responsibility is to our own people. I understand, Madam President, but some of those trapped survivors are humans too. Colonists who couldn't make it back before the barriers failed. Scientists who stayed behind to help with evacuation efforts. There are people as much as anyone. Elsa's, Nicole felt the weight of command pressing down on her. Every decision she made would affect millions of lives, human and alien alike. She looked around the command center at the faces of her advisors, seeing the same conflict reflected in their expressions. Dr. Kim, how would a large-scale rescue operation affect Project New Genesis? It would delay the project by months, maybe years. We'd need to divert resources to build and equip a rescue fleet. More importantly, we'd risk losing the scientists and engineers we need to make the project work. Admiral Patterson stepped forward. Madam President, I volunteer to lead the rescue operation personally. We can't abandon our own people, no matter what their governments did to us. Other voices joined in. Captain Danny Walsh, now promoted to Fleet Admiral, offered his experienced crews. Dr. Maria Santos volunteered to help identify survivor locations. Even civilian leaders spoke up, offering to convert cargo ships into evacuation vessels. Nicole realized that this was who humanity was. Not the violent aggressors that the Council had feared, but people who would risk everything to save others, even those who had wronged them. Very well. Admiral Patterson, you have authorization for Operation Last Light. Rescue as many survivors as possible, but don't take unnecessary risks. We need you back to help with New Genesis. The next 6 months became a desperate race against time. Human fleets ventured into the collapsing regions of space, fighting through swarms of dimensional entities to reach isolated survivor groups. Ships that had been designed for exploration and trade were converted into weapons of war, their crews volunteering for missions that many would not survive. Meanwhile, construction began on the Genesis stations, massive installations that would serve as anchors for humanity's pocket dimensions. Each station required the combined resources of multiple star systems, their construction overseen by the finest engineers from dozens of species working together. Nicole stood on the observation deck of Genesis Prime as the final survivors arrived from the rescue operations. Through the viewport, she could see the strange sight of artificial stars being born, each one the center of a new pocket dimension where the remnants of galactic civilization could survive and grow. Admiral Patterson joined her at the viewport, his uniform bearing new scars from the rescue missions. Final count, Madam President. We saved about 8 million beings, including 3,000 humans who were trapped in the outer territories. Casualties. Heavy, we lost 47 ships and over 5,000 crew members. Nicole bowed her head for a moment, thinking about the people who had died saving others. They died as heroes, Admiral. Yes, ma'am. They did. Behind them, representatives from surviving species worked together on plans for their new homes in the pocket dimensions. Former enemies sat side by side, their old prejudices forgotten in the face of shared survival. Children of different species played together, their laughter a promise that something better could be built from the ashes of the old galaxy. Jake Morrison, now elderly but still sharp, approached the observation deck. The former ambassador moved slowly, but his eyes were still bright with intelligence and purpose. "Quite a view," he said, looking out at the Genesis stations under construction. Nicole smiled sadly. "Not what any of us planned for our future." "No. But maybe it's better. The old galaxy was built on fear and mistrust. Maybe this new one can be different." Through the viewport, they watched human and alien engineers working together to install the final components of a Genesis station. The sight was both heartbreaking and hopeful, a reminder of what had been lost and what might yet be saved. "Do you think they learned anything?" Nicole asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching the mixed crews of survivors and humans collaborate on their shared future. "I think they learned that the galaxy is more dangerous than they imagined, and that survival sometimes requires setting aside pride."